Hey everybody, it's John Scardena. We are about to do an episode with Moose. Awesome episode. He's a search and rescue expert out of Yosemite. He's an author of 2 books. He's an instructor. Awesome mentor for us in the field. After we recorded the episode with him, there was a tragic incident with a climber who had climbed El Capitan, and then unfortunately it appears that he went back down to grab a bag, and as he was rappelling, fell to his death. And it's incredibly tragic. We hope that Moose and the other responders who had to deal with that situation are able to process that situation. However, again, we thought it was important to call that out because we did not record this episode because of that incident. Unfortunately, Moose, as an expert, has to respond to all kinds of incidents all year round in Yosemite. That's why he's an expert. That's why we trust him. At the same time, we don't want to hype on tragic incidents. This is now another episode where we get to preface this, which again highlights the need for best practice in emergency management, mitigation as the king of the hill, essentially. We need to get a lot better at mitigation. And if we have to deal with response and recovery, that we have all the resources and leaders that we can find to be able to help us get those resources. We hope that you learn something from this, and we hope that we can learn from you as well. All right, with that, Moose episode, here we go. Welcome back, everyone, to the Disaster Tough podcast, where we share insights into the big plays and right calls of leadership. We dive deep into the stories, lessons learned, and ideas that will help you in the field. Let's go. Welcome back to the Disaster Tough podcast. I'm your host, John Scardena. I have a very special episode this week, and therefore I'm very excited for this week's episode. This person is world-renowned because you might confuse them with an animal. His name is Moose. He has a Christian name. We're not going to refer to that. Only his mother refers to him by that. So he goes by Moose. But essentially, this guy has tons of awards. He's done incredible work for the SAR community. He's been in Yosemite since 2002. He is from the UK. So shout out to some of our friends from the UK who've been on the podcast. Gwen, Zoe, Barry, Steve, all those people over there from across the pond. Oh, and by the way, big asterisk here because I'll be back in London in October to help out NATO and urban warfare stuff. And so excited to return there. But for the sake of conversation, we talk about public lands and we talk about urban search and rescue and the differences there. And we talk about every once in a while mental first aid. And Moose can really hit on all those topics and really help us understand the similarities, the differences. And as we're talking, if you are a first responder who is kind of going through the throes right now, please listen to what Moose is saying. We want you to deal with those quote unquote injuries that you have dealt with in the past and be able to get up and fight another day. So with that, Moose, welcome to the podcast.
John, thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Yes. So right now you're in Yosemite, correct?
I'm just outside Yosemite, yeah.
Okay. So tell us a little about, just for the setting the stage of the conversation, some of the areas of focus that you have to deal with.
I work within search and rescue in Yosemite National Park, and I'm a national trainer for the National Park Service in Swiftwater rescue and recovery, and predominantly family liaison officer training.
Can I just say, speaking of first responders and all that in Yosemite, I went to Yosemite in 2021, potentially. I think it was 2021. And they were doing controlled burns. And I absolutely loved it because when we came into the Yosemite Valley, it made it look like there's this like really cool fog that definitely wasn't there. It was from the smoke. So I have all these amazing photos, and people are like, "How did you wake up that early to take all those pictures of that fog?" I'm like, "I can't tell you; it's a secret." But thank you for the controlled burns.
It's a toxic fog. It's like that idea of exposure to anybody who's been around wildland fire, and you're aware of what's in that smoke now. The more and more work that's done shows what we're exposed to, and we have to manage.
You know, funny enough, I was in constant stress because we lived in Sacramento when my wife was pregnant with our second one, and the smoke came into the Sacramento Valley and just stayed there for months. And it was 2020 and COVID year and all this other stuff, and I was so stressed out from my wife's mental health and the whole deal, or her physical health. So
And so and that's an important thing to remember about California is California's summer used to be just sucked in with smoke because smoke was part of the system. Fire was part of the system. It's only in the last 120 years with the suppression of fire that we have these mega burns that have this incredible dumping uh, that and you've sort of witnessed one of those fantastic prescribed burns that helps to mitigate all that fuel on the forest floor.
And for the sake of this show, we don't get into politics too much, but politics does play a role in how those control burns uh, affect your operations from a SAR perspective. And I know you talked about Swiftwater Rescue as well, but um, from the last couple of decades and how those policies maybe impacts the parks, how does that impact your job? Has it made it easier? Has there been essentially no effect? Do does Murphy's Law still apply? How does that all go into play into your job?
I think SAR on the Fed side, there is an emergency hire AD process where we get pulled into major fires, and you might get dispatched out to do something that's at your level of skill. So I went out to the Ferguson fire, which is a umpteen 100,000 acre burn that shut the park down, and I ran river operations, ferrying firefighters across the river, right on the fire line. So we get pulled in into that area where our expertise is at. Um, and it's easy now with the sort of needs that we have in these major fires that you can get pulled all over the country on a 14-day assignment.
Are you looking for bleeding control equipment? Impulse by Doberman Bleeding Control equipment is professional grade and built to save lives. From the Responder Pro Sling for first responders to wall-mounted kits with AEDs, compact packs for ushers and security, and the MCI resupply cache for standby teams, get your Impulse kits and training from impulsekits.com. RSET builds immersive virtual reality environments that mirror real-world spaces, giving military and first responders the power to train, analyze, and document with precision. Experience mission-ready simulation with rset.com. Protect your school, venue, facility, or community with Doberman Emergency Management's specialized 3x3 approach. We do this with protecting life, property, and continuity of operations through advanced planning, training, and assessments. Learn more about our cutting-edge approach with world-class professionals in emergency services today at DobermanEMG.com. Emergency management is changing. Are you keeping up? The Readiness Lab takes it to the next level with exclusive tabletop exercises, live sessions, and real-world intel. Access the EOC as a TRL insider, train with us through NLEM, or rep the field with our EMTs. Yeah, that's a pun. We also deliver top-tier marketing and design for emergency services and public safety, outreach, product reviews, trade show support, sponsorships, and more. The Readiness Lab is the #1 emergency services podcast network, home of the NLEM certification, bold outreach, and everything pushing the field forward. Learn more at thereadinesslab.com. Like what you're hearing? Check out our show notes for more details, including the links to each of our sponsors.
So what's your if you're doing, that pooling aspect while maintaining your expertise in, public lands and really Yosemite, do you get to be Alex Honnold every once in a while and go up El Capitan? Like what is your most common rescue that you have to do?
The most common one is a slip and a fall and a twisted ankle, and it's a run up the trail with a wheeled litter and pull them out, or to do some sort of helicopter operation in the backcountry if you're a bit deeper. But it's pretty minor. We run 220 missions a year with 12 to 20 fatalities, and the
Oh
vast
wow.
majority is going to be trips and falls. And then depending on which park unit in, you might have this higher number in or around deaths. Somewhere like Lake Mead, you have a high number of drownings. If you go to Grand Canyon, you've got a lot of heat-related deaths. So it varies a little bit. And across all the park units, I don't know what the death total is a year, and that's somewhat the leading cause of death across the National Park Service, I believe, is motor vehicle accidents.
Is it between slip and falls and motor vehicle? Are most of the people that either you are rescuing or are victims? When I use that terminology, I'm thinking about emergency manager, survivor, victim. Are they typically intoxicated?
No, I mean, you can have a high number in and around vehicles. You might see a higher percentage, but most of the time it's people who believe they can perform at this level and they underestimate what the challenge is. So they've gone out and they've got to their point, top of Half Dome, and they've done great, but the success is based on getting back to the trailhead, and they fail on that point, and that's where they have to be helped off the trail. And in truth, a rescue coming off the trail is you're in a litter, you're tied in it, you've got a big wheel underneath, and you're being run down a trail at high speed by experienced operators. And when I've heard people talk about it, they talk about how scary it is because you can't see anything. You're just staring straight up, and it's at night, and there's a few headlights, and you're hearing the interchange from the litter crew. And I've run out people with 4 or 5 on the litter down the Yosemite Falls Trail, which is a steep umpteen thousand-foot descent, and you know what you're doing, but it doesn't necessarily feel like that when you're in the litter. So managing the person in the litter to give them some confidence they're gonna make it is also part of the job.
Interesting. I would have never thought about the person being scared as they're being rescued. Like you'd think it'd be a sigh of relief, but that their anxiety remains and or increases.
Well, it's all about powerlessness. It's if you're in control, if you're sitting in an ambulance and you have a minor injury and you're on high flow oxygen, you feel great and you can hear the sirens and somebody's holding your hand, it's great. If it's at night and it's 11 o'clock and it's a bit of rain on is falling and you don't know anybody and you're moving at speed because we don't want to be up there any longer than we have to. And you remember the trail that you walked up and now you're sitting in a sled. It's that's part of patient management is putting them in a position where you can allay their fears. You can't get rid of them completely. Checking in with them frequently, you're keeping them hydrated as much as you can and keeping food in there. But the longer you're out on the trail, the more risk you have.
I think it's fascinating that you brought up like the overconfidence aspect. I would have not thought that. But what's that famous quote about everybody who began hiking Mount Everest believed that they could, so don't believe in yourself.
Well, there's a lot of failures going up there. I have a friend of mine did some filmmaking on Mount Everest, and he has some amazing footage. And he actually was not very well, and he needed to be evacuated. And a Sherpa carried him out. And my friend is over 6'3", and the Sherpa was significantly smaller. And there is a picture of him balanced on the back of a Sherpa being carried down the trail.
No way.
And I think there's this sort of piece in there where we arrive as invincible and we fail to be vulnerable.
Mm.
And then we end up in a position where we have to have somebody help us. And that's a hard thing. That's a hard thing sometimes to accept.
Well, that's the so I've talked to like Chief Brian Davis, who managed Pulse nightclub shooting, who talked about that incident as well as from a firefighter perspective, like this duality of I have to be incredibly confident, like that alpha mentality that usually comes with first responders, right? I can do anything, but being humble enough to be teachable. You're talking about the survivor, but I think how do you balance both training people who are coming into the field as well as yourself? Like, I know I can get that person off the mountain at 11 o'clock at night when it's raining, 20,000-foot descent, as well as being vulnerable enough to not put yourself in harm's way. How do you balance that?
Well, in water, it's very easy because you teach humility. I'm 60. I'm still swimming in the river and training people, not at the same level I used to do 20 years ago. And you'll get some young, new fired up ranger who is very physical and strong, and they that haven't necessarily been exposed to water, and you put them in a position where they get safely humbled, and you go, okay, you just figured out that you can't get across the river just by bullying your way across. You've got to have some finesse and technique. And we'll talk about how you can get yourself in a difficult position very quickly, and that means you will die. And we have those hard conversations. And I think it's part of professional development with command presence, the idea you're in charge and you're projecting this idea, you know everything. There are some fantastic people I worked with over the years who are able to project that in a way that also allows them to listen. And that's the single thing, the biggest thing in humility is the ability to show you're listening. And that empathy and compassion drifts in there, but to really listen to what people are saying and to listen to yourself and know what your limit is. Heroes become heroes quite often because they die, and they've done something instinctively that they believe is within their wheelhouse of reaction and operation. But there are a whole bunch of them that go in and needlessly die because they didn't pull off their turnout pants, their drowning pants as a firefighter. They entered in, in equipment that isn't going to help them, or they jump in a swollen river or at the beach and they don't understand a riptide. They can swim in a pool great, but they're in a riptide. I had a colleague actually who entered the surf to rescue their dogs, and they drowned and died, and the dogs survived. And I think there's one of the things that I talk a lot about, and I really enjoy when I get operators ring me up and tell me, is they'll say, hey, we did a Swiftwater rescue and no rescuer entered the water. And the idea, the perfect Swiftwater rescue is where you're still dry on the bank.
Interesting. Yeah, okay, first of all, I'm sorry to hear about your friend and like that again, that overconfidence versus the dog surviving, that I'm sure that could be an entire episode in itself. Um from a as a guy who does not do Swiftwater rescue, I'm both surprised and impressed to hear like the perfect Swiftwater rescues when you don't get wet. Um but going back to your previous comment, and this is like a tip of the hat to you as well as some of these other people we've had on here. Some of the most experienced, most incredible leaders I've seen, especially in SAR, like Joe Hernandez, like Chief Walt Lewis, or in other aspects, the General McKinneys of the world. They're also the most approachable people I've ever met. And for all their accolades, for all the things that they have done, I don't know if they always were like that, or if you've always been like that. It's inherent to your personality, or is it they gotten older, they have had those hard lessons, and so they've become quote unquote a little bit more soft or approachable. But it does seem to be a common trend of highly experienced, highly successful leaders in this space to also be forever learners and to have that humility to say, I have a thing to learn, as well as to go to somebody else who's had a very difficult moment to say, all right, now this was a learning moment and you can get through this too. Do you find that to be true for yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think success. The reason I love search and rescue is we have a single mission with a single goal, and we all focus on doing it. We put our egos on hold. We all fulfill our roles within the ICS incident command system. We don't get in each other's way because we're focused on the outcome, and that requires you to understand your role and be able to listen to what's going on around you. And success is based on uh, cooperation. It's not based on a singular person saying waving a flag and running after it. It's based on you all working together and having an agreed approach. And I think the idea that you said there of listening. So I was teaching in the spring, and we all got out the water, and I was chatting away, and I have an instructor I work with who's just developing, and I was chatting away, and I've got 30, 40 years of experience of teaching this stuff, and he stopped me, and Zach looked at somebody across the circle, and he said, "How are you cold?" To the couple of people who were there, and they said, "Yeah, we can't. We're so cold, we can't listen." And he stopped me in full flow, and I had missed an elemental part of that sort of teaching, which is, are people in a position to learn? Because I was caught up in the moment, and I've got all these experience. It didn't really matter, and he reset at that moment. And he went and got warm. We took 10 minutes off. We used it as a lesson of being, hey, be aware, situationally aware people are at when you're trying to ask people to do something, because we just made a mistake here in a training setup. It wasn't an operation, it's training, so it's forgivable. And it took somebody who's newer to point that out. And I need to have humility in that moment to not be like, no, it's not a problem. It's my mistake. It's on me. So you're modeling. And when you have a really good model to go off as an apprentice or being a mentored, it helps you be more successful further along, because your legacy as a leader is not your name, it's your action. It's to be ego free.
That's the mic drop moment right there, right? It's almost like you've done this once or twice before. So when you're talking about like that experience in class, I remember, gosh, I always talk about him. I got to stop talking about him. His head's probably so big. Is Pete Gaynor coming to our first counterterrorism training and pulling me aside and giving me some much needed advice about essentially distractions. Like I get pretty passionate. He's like, you don't worry about that stuff. Just get to the solutions. And I basically had to do full stop right in the middle of my training. And I was so focused on my ego, I think, without really admitting it at the time, that I missed basic things, you know? And you fast forward, and having somebody with that confidence to be able to approach you and say, hey, like, here's a correction you might need to make, and making it can really help. On the other side, I've seen people where, we try to help them out for the best intentions, and if they're not willing to listen, they can really miss some great opportunities.
Well, they endanger themselves, they endanger the team, and they endanger the patient. And you need to have a culture which is able to give. We hear the word feedback, but effective communication to pull people back and to reassess where they're at. And I really enjoy Yosemite because I'm a rarity in Yosemite in that I hate everything to do with rigging. So if you're doing these big vertical lowers and assists, and it's to do with knots and loads and maths, I want nothing to do with it. I'll sit on the edge of a system and I will manage a prusik, a brake system on the hull, and I'll clip into the rope and I'll pull a rope. But setting stuff up, I just stand back and let everybody else who loves that do it. And I think that early on, I would have been at the front pushing for my system, my idea. And in truth, my idea would have been 80%, 85% of other people's ideas. That 15% we're arguing over is negligible. It's which side of the tree is it not going to be. It's not really, it's important, but not that important. And so it's recognizing early on that you don't have to have the answers to everything. Many other people have the solution. And by
Yes.
buying into it, it doesn't make you lesser. When you use somebody else's solution, it doesn't say you're worthless. It's doing the job it needs to done, and you've helped facilitate that.
I was just thinking about a podcast I recorded, gosh, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, where somebody said basically the same thing. And I hope that by bringing on experts like yourself and you saying that and them hearing that again a couple weeks ago, it starts to resonate with people, because I'm not too sure that is a common thought within our community. And the idea of buying into what other people are doing, and that you don't have to like spearhead all your ideas, and not every idea has to be new. Funny enough, Steve Johnson, he was talking about research in emergency services and military, and he found that like every 7 years someone would come up with the same idea and then think it's a new idea because they hadn't been listening to others are doing their research. And those who had been there for a minute or two, who had known about that, they instantly lose credibility. But by you coming in and listening to other people and adopting to what they do, and bringing your own strengths, I think has helped Yosemite. Now, for the fact of Yosemite in particular, um, it's kind of like a dog and a squirrel kind of moment. What is the longest rescue operation you've had to do, or probably one of the most memorable? That might not be the same thing, but I'm sure some of these missions take quite a bit of time.
Some of the recoveries have taken years. That you're on it at the
Oh,
very
wow.
start. You've pulled the resources up. You've done a big search. You got no clues, and they resolve years later. The longest one I've done that sort of springs to mind is recoveries from the river that went in July. We found all three, and we found the final one in December when the river froze and there was ice that pulled the flow of the river down enough that we could access. And we were free diving pools and looking around, and we found the last person. So that's the best part of 6 months of continual workshopping, trying to figure out tabletopping where they might be and where we might look, and then knowing the conditions to go out to make sure we have the best success. And that was a collaborative. We're all sitting around talking about, here's some search theory, and oh wow, it didn't follow search theory. The bodies went a lot further than we thought they would. Ooh, you can't deny it. You just accept it. You go, okay, we have to change up what that theory is.
The that process of recovery, because you can focus on this on years potentially, and where the body can go. Is there there's there a moment of like closure once you're able to get that body to back to the to the family or otherwise, where there is a huge relief, or have you been working on it for so long you're just more of happy to close it out?
So there's two things that um, I push back pretty hard on the word closure. I think you'll hear teams say, "I hope this brings closure to the family." That I find that super presumptive. They've lost their loved one in this traumatic environment, and I'm going to presume that this is going to close a door. It isn't. It's opened a door. It's the next point of grieving, and so closure is a weighted word for me. I will say that when I find someone or I am part of ending that chapter, and it might be semantics, but the idea this journey continues, and it does it in two volumes. One of them is me and the team, and one of them is the family, and they're radically different. And that in the team, it's part of my mission, it is part of the job, and I process it, and I'm doing a lot more healthy things now, like working along the stress continuum, look at where I'm operable and where I'm injured and where things have got complicated and I can't deal with it. The family's journey is radically different. And so I've stepped back from that and I remove myself from it to protect myself, and I take some satisfaction from helping to resolve this mystery for the family, but I'm not gonna be presumptive about where or what they are at. They can say what they want, and I'll listen to it, and I'll acknowledge it, and I won't push back on it. They own it.
First of all, fantastic insight. I was thinking more of closure for you, as a
Yeah,
responder. But I also think, yeah, I think we're really guilty of thinking like we know what the family is going through and that process of grievance. I remember in my undergrad, I got to go to funny enough, a PIO conference where they talked about different disasters from a communication standpoints, and they talked about the Reno air show disaster. And there was an entire conversation of at what point do you stop telling the family through signed paperwork that they have to sign? Obviously, it's not just a um, we don't tell the family, but when you find more and more DNA or another body part, to allow the family to move on, and that process of communicating with, um, the family of, you know, you have buried your remains, the rest will be whatever. And it's the entire spectrum. Some people wanted absolutely everything, and so every months would
yeah.
go by, years would go by, and they'd get more. Versus other people are like, "I got the thumb. That's good enough. I don't want to think about this anymore." And not to presume, using your word there, I love that word. That we know what's best for that individual. And I don't know if they know necessarily know either, but
Right.
yeah.
And that quite often, as a family liaison officer, which is the person we utilize to go in and be the incident commander's representative with that very complicated emotional communication soup that's happening, uh, what you're doing is you're giving families information that's choreographed so they can listen to it and understand it. You might be doing written narratives and some pictures and then restating stuff and revisiting notes in order for them to integrate it and understand. But they're making the running within your framework, the limits of what you can do. It isn't boundless what you can do. And so very early when I'm on assignment, I will talk about, okay, this is my role. These are my limits. We're going to figure out when we step outside that who you would talk to next. But I'm not a counselor or therapist, and I give them control in a lot of ways. And by giving them that foundational building block of, oh, I have choices here, whether I'm going to have more or less. It's binary. It's not 5 or 6 different things. It's either this fork or this fork. You're starting to put them in a position of higher functionality because they're making simple decisions. And as they go further and further along that chain, they become more and more functional, and it makes our job and their lives easier in processing this sort of administrative, empathetic, compassionate administration.
You just brought up something that I know emergency managers struggle with, but I'm sure it's across the board, is to tell, now you were talking about to the families, but really to leadership, what my limits are. Um, you know, even myself, I have such a mentality of like, whatever the mission is, get it done. And I want other people to be around me who are like that, and I want to be like that. But emergency managers in particular, their scope is forever changing because they're not great at articulating to stakeholders or leadership or to partners, whatever. Like, this is my role in this. And if it's outside of that scope, here's a great resources for you to talk to. I think they're afraid to tell people what the limits are on that. If you were going to give leadership advice to somebody who is struggling with that, to whatever, to make them more effective in their job, what advice would you give them?
Well, allow delegation to happen. Don't micromanage because they aren't doing it how you would do it. And they're doing it, as we go back to 85% of the way you would do it, 50% personality. That's great. If they take an hour longer to do it, big deal. Is let go, let people do their job, and then afterwards do some professional development. If it hasn't immediately compromised safety, or it hasn't got to a point where now something unworkable and it's getting done, let that happen. And I think that if you are in this position where you are proud, you are prideful about your ability to multitask, you need to take a long, hard look at yourself and figure out, well, are you actually effective when you're multitasking? Most people aren't. And the second thing is, you probably aren't giving the job up to other people, and it's unrealistic. Your 110, 120% is actually 50%. You really aren't that good. You're doing a lot is different from quality, quantity, quality. And I know it keeps coming at you like a fire hose, but if you're expecting other people to make strategic decisions over resources and how and when you do stuff, you need to model that, and you need to be seen saying no.
You know, it's really funny. I find with talking with most people who like, I'll give you 2 examples, one of which, and they're both buddies of mine, I like them both, but one would always talk about, like, "I don't have a big ego, you can't have an ego." He had the biggest ego of anybody I'd ever met, and it's like, "Oh, like, know thyself? Like, you definitely don't." And the other one is somebody who talked about their, like, energy level all the time, like, "Oh, I have high energy." It's like, "You're the lowest energy of anyone I know." It's like, and so I've had to like really pull in to make sure I don't become like that as well. Of like, oh, like know thyself is important. I am not a great multitasker. I used to think I was, and then I saw my wife handle our 3 kids, and I was like, oh, that's multitasking. Like, she is so great at multitasking. In fact, I think moms should like lead most of our operations because they're just so good at handling many things. But like going back to like the idea of like dealing with people and helping train people, man, there's some people who are like, oh, I'm very teachable. Like, they're not very teachable. So now, like, I almost have this complex when I hear somebody say that they're very good at something, I automatically assume that they're not very good at something because I'm like, oh, they probably don't have great situational awareness. And conversely, the people who I meet who always say, oh, I'm not very good at this, I'm not, they're actually usually very good at it. And I'm like, what is this weird complex where we're all very poor about identifying what we're good at and what we're not good at. I luckily have a team around me now who build upon my strengths and have helped me identify, where my areas of deficiencies are. And so we're very efficient now because of their strengths.
And you made a fantastic point there. You said, I have a team around me. You didn't say my team. I always my hackles go up, my alarms go up when I hear somebody go, "My team," because team is possessional, right? "Oh, they're mine." And actually, I'm part of that team as a leader. So they're the most important. They're doing all the work. I'm kinda out there doing some choreography and making a few difficult decisions, but they're doing the heavy lifting. I'm part of their team,
Yeah,
and
I
I
want to
think
support
that's
them.
we flip that. So, the idea of "my" is really important to get rid of. So, I recognized probably 10 years ago, I was swimming at a much lower level in Swiftwater, and I started recruiting in younger, really good swimmers so that I could still be safe, and I'm gonna operate in my sort of boundaries of safety, my window of safety. And then I brought surf lifeguards in to demonstrate and be on the river and be able to chase people down. And that is really important because I'm 60 and round. I'm not 29 and long and lithe. I'm a different shape, but I have a heavier weight in my brain, so I can teach and I can share information. But it's that sharing piece, and leadership is critically sharing. It's not about rarely is it being right on the tip of that spear. There's certain times in combat, in fire, where you have to make a radical decision immediately. You need someone to stand up, and everybody sort of rallies and goes. Most of the time, you have more time in leadership than you think. The good leader is about quantum physics. They can both expand time and they can shrink time.
Y that brings on, um, the name of the books in particular and really the books you've written. So, I should have led with this, you're also an author. So, you have, like, when accidents happen, you have searching, finding a purpose, laughter, and distraction through search and rescue. And hopefully we've done a little bit on that today. But how has writing in particular transformed your career rather than the career impacting the writing on the reverse? How has the actual, like, getting down and processing that changed how your career has, the career trajectory?
So when accidents happen, managing crisis communication as a family liaison officer made me actually sit there and write down the way that I think in working in and around people. And I like to say that articulated a way of doing something, not the way. And
Ooh,
I think
yes.
this idea that what is an expert, X is an unknown quantity, spurt water under pressure, it's kind of a bit of a joke. So I like the idea that I have an idea and then I tell people, hey, here's a framework and you can hang your personality, your experiences, and your expertise onto that framework if you choose to. So I think for the book, that book, what it did was it made me sit down and say, what you do intuitively, you need to capture in a text because a good trainer articulates intuition and the stuff that they do naturally in order for an apprentice or mentee to actually develop. And that's the failure in a lot of training is people watch people do something and then the expert, the person who's meant to know what they do, never actually explains what they were thinking and why they were doing it. So the book made me think about that intuitive expression in a different form. The second book, Searching, was purely about dealing with trauma. The idea of being exposed on the front line to 100 deaths in which I'm working intimate in and around families at their worst moment of discovery of somebody dying. And it's actually starting to sit there and say, hey, what's the long-term impact of this? And getting to a healthier point. And service is a great thing, but service comes at a cost if you don't manage the accumulated traumas that you've been in and around. And so I processed that complicated legacy of exposure to other people's loss in particular.
That's interesting. By the way, the word interesting is not very interesting. I've said that about 15 times. It's like when you say something so profound, you don't know what to say. You're like, I'm processing. Give me a second to process. Podcasting doesn't give you time to process, by the way. Um, I, I had a particular difficult night dealing with the loss of a 4-year-old in the Macon, Georgia tornadoes. And I've been in other incidents and um, I've dealt with loss of life before that and after that, but for some reason, I don't know why, but even now, it is the one that gets me. Equally, what gets me is the Surfside building collapse. There was a firefighter who pulled off his ex-wife and his daughter from the rubble pile, and um, I trained or I supported the training of the med spec rescuers who had 1 month prior been went into the class, and then they went to Surfside building collapse, and it's like your heart just breaks. I mean, it's a gut wrenching feeling. I've talked to several responders about this on the episode and or on different episodes, and similar to you and writing, the trajectory of how I now address issues with personnel, their challenges, survivors that I interact with have changed because of these conversations with other people who have done it. And I don't think I understood that when I first started talking to people around the field. Now, the one pushback to what you're saying is about experts. I do think, for the sake of stakeholders and trust in the community, we need to both call out and identify true experts. And I
Right.
think 99% of people are not that. Like, my big thing is, if you think the White House, if you're on the short list for the White House or for some important institution to call you, then you're probably an expert. You know, you're that in your career where you can be identified as an expert for the field. That doesn't take away from having an expertise individually or becoming incredible. But um, I try to find people that I can learn from constantly, and you're one of those people for sure.
I I taught a rope rescue course one time in North Carolina, and our assistant instructor was one of the Culberson brothers, and the Culbersons were the leading alpinists in the 80s, climbing major peaks in the Himalaya
Well,
Alps and around the world. And he was the assistant, and so I would say something, and then I would look over at Matt and be like, "And would you like to say something?"
yes,
And
you're the presiding authority on this. Yeah,
yeah, and I agree with you. The idea, anybody who professes their own expertise, that they need to be pretty good. I think you, again, it comes back to that humility thing. And to return to the point where you talked about the loss of life with a young person in Georgia, I I think it is okay for us to revisit those feelings and not to lose our humanity. Because when we lose our humanity in the treatment of others, that empathy, that compassion, and we become the machine, there is a time that someone needs us to be human and hold their hand at a difficult moment, and we need to be ready to do that. And so if we're just wearing this armor and this shield and pushing the emotions down, and we lose, again, I said it, that humanity, that is a loss in that moment that someone is in dire need of. And our colleagues need humanity. And in that dark humor and that dismissal of feelings, we need to make sure that we create the space where we can be vulnerable and we can shed tears and we can be quiet, uh, so that we can process what we've gone through, because it's traumatic.
I think about this literally this weekend. For those who may not know, my father passed away about 8 months ago. And there was a snowstorm the weekend of the funeral, so I wasn't able to fly home for the funeral. I was there at his passing, but when the funeral happened, I wasn't able to go, and so I went to his gravesite for the first time this weekend. And uh, there's been a lot of dark humor from me after my father has passed, including my aunt, who asked me what kind of pizza my family wanted, and I said, well, the only appropriate pizza would be Tombstone pizza, and making all these jokes. But that is definitely the way I process. However, when I was at the gravesite, it was a very quiet moment, um, and not necessarily because I focus on the gravesite in particular, but I recognize the area that I'm in, and I try to, like, quote unquote read the room, right? And that goes back to um, kind of what we're saying again. The self-proclaimed experts are usually not the experts, and the self-proclaimed, all these things. It's like, whatever the situation. Maybe the biggest lesson from this episode is know thyself, and know thyself to not build thyself up too big. Let other people do that for you, and that humility. I would much rather be around a Steve Johnson of the world, who is one of the most humble people I've ever met, and yet he is literally the global expert, period, the global expert on counterterrorism or counter CBRN for urban warfare. And yet you will never hear him say that. My wife, when she introduces herself, she calls herself a designer. She did the Academy Award, she did the Ritz Carlton rebranding, she's done Sous Vide magazine, and yet me and my personality, when people meet me, I'm like, here's all my accolades, you know? And being around those kind of people have made me just chill out a bit.
I
And
I think there's that idea that we're all on this journey through life, and there are high moments and low moments, and everybody's has those things going on.
yeah,
And the one thing that we need to be aware of in our current society is becoming the focus of whether it's social media or that moment, and actually that you can exist in the shadows and have a great life. And I think that one of the things I talk about a lot with people is be willing to be a witness. Is that when people are having a hard time, there's often this idea that we move away from them and insulate and give them the room. And actually, there's a case to be made where you just sit next to somebody and you're quiet. So when somebody says, "I don't know what to say," I say, "Well, don't say anything." It's the idea that we don't leave people alone. We actually are present. And I think that that for me has been one of the most powerful personal development pieces, is to watch the quiet strength that people marshal in this dire moment to try and reconstitute the world around them in this new reality, and then figure out how to take that tentative first step forward. And if you're there to hold their hand and help them through that and get a bit of momentum up, and then move back and they did it themselves, that is a beautiful gift.
one of the one of my favorite passages in the Old Testament is, "No one knows you're a fool until you open your mouth," and it makes me very nervous as a podcaster. And yet, by bringing on other people who have expertises in areas that I don't have, right? Swiftwater rescue, definitely not an expert. You know, counter CBRN, not my background. Like, I'm not a biologist or a chemist or anything. But by bringing people on and allowing them to speak, you can't even imagine the amount of people who think I have an expertise in these areas, because I surround myself with people who do. And I think that's the other trick as well. Like, operating quote unquote in the shadows and just having a quiet life. Um, not by presenting yourself, but by doing the work and surrounding yourself with great people. You don't have to worry about it if you are one of those people who worry about public perception of yourself, because naturally doing it, it happens. Now, I always have to push back and tell people, no, I brought in this expert. But my other problem is, these baby blue eyes and the alpha personality, they want me to be on stage, but I refuse constantly. But um, as we're wrapping up, like I said, I barely mentioned it, and we probably need to have you back on the show just so we can talk about it more. But you are an author. If somebody wanted to learn more about you, Moose, your career, and some of the things that we're talking about, where can they go buy the books to get a frame of reference?
If you do Moose Mutlow on with Amazon, my books will pop up there. And then www.moosemutlow.com, that's my website, and that has an overview about trainings that I do, some resources for people working with people in crisis, and some training ideas. That's the place to start.
I think you should change your website to just Moose. And speaking of mental health, I'm going to do this. I'm going to embarrass. So this whole time, my baby and my wife have been in the background, and I've been so trying to focus on you. But sources of joy and happiness, right there.
Hey, connectivity to community and family is a primary mover in good mental health. And if we're looking at long-term like health within responder groups and avoiding that specter of suicide, it's connections to your community, healthy choices, and I would say healthy practice, the idea of getting out there and doing the things that you love. And if being with your family is one of them, you need to do that and not think about the job.
Again, you're like the mic drop guy. We need to have you back on and talk about these things. We'll also put in, for the show notes, we'll put in the links to
Thank you.
your books. Yeah, of course. And for everybody who's listening in, especially those who are struggling right now, You might be struggling with mental health and trying to overcome the traumatic incidents, or you might be struggling with a little bit of pride. So stop building yourself up and get some help and get the resources you need. But also, if you want to reach out to Moose directly, send us an email at contact@thereadinesslab.com. We'll forward it on to him. And with that, if you have found a resource that has helped you, put it on social media, help out the community, the professional community. And with that, we'll see you for the next one. Peace.